Hello and welcome to episode 283 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts, along with strategies for success. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we will air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform, leave a review or a rating. That would mean a lot to me and also help others find the show. Tell a friend about the podcast and help get the word out there that introversion is a beautiful thing. So I was speaking on introversion recently, and someone asked, do introverts prefer online meetings? And it seemed like the assumption was that they did. And we have to be really careful when we're making generalizations about all introverts. There's so many aspects to our personalities. And I think the question is going to depend on the individual introvert. So I had to think about it for a second. And for myself, I said in general, I preferred going to in-person meetings. I feel more connected in an in-person environment. It's easier to read the room and feel present. Soon after the pandemic, I was presenting at a high-stakes meeting and I could just see many faces on the screen, but I could not read the room at all. It was very uncomfortable, very silent. I couldn't tell if the people were laughing at my jokes, just like right now, right? And virtual meetings became widespread with the pandemic, and they have become a very common way to meet ever since. But they have their place. But in-person meetings have their place too. And of course, there's the hybrid meeting, which I was doing long before the pandemic. I had many team members that were at different locations, and we would make sure that they could attend if they couldn't travel. I will tell you that since the pandemic, the technology for online or hybrid meetings has greatly improved. Rooms are better equipped with microphones, and the technology is just better. So, anyway, do you have a preference for online or virtual meetings, and why? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the pros and cons of the different types of meetings. And of course, the most important thing, how can we show up our best as introverts? So, again, in-person meeting I think is usually the best if you can do it. You can do stronger relationship building and you can read the nonverbal cues. Again, after the pandemic, I was in a different meeting and it was almost like, this was in person and it was almost like people didn't know how to react anymore. They wanted their emojis, which I don't really care for. But anyway, in an in-person meeting, you can get better engagement, have a richer discussion, especially if there's some brainstorming or sensitive conversations kinds of things. The interaction is easier and hands-on collaboration is easier most of the time. Also, it's easier to connect before or after meetings, you know? I even just meetings that were on my location, if you had to walk to a meeting, you could walk with a colleague, or after the meeting, you could walk back with a colleague. And it was just nice for making connections that sometimes were spontaneous. Of course, the in-person meeting could be more expensive and time consuming. Depends on the situation. Maybe it's just your meeting on location, which is great, but maybe there is travel involved and parking rooms, meals, all that stuff. And of course, you can't always meet in person. You work with people all around. I mean, even with this podcast, I love it. I talk to people all over the world that I otherwise wouldn't be able to talk to. And and there are people too that have mobility or health limitations that can't attend in person. And not only does it take the time to meet, but there's the before and after of traveling, whether it be a few minutes to the a meeting room or, hours to a meeting location. So virtual meetings definitely have a place. There's no travel and you can schedule more meetings. And so you definitely can save money, that type of thing. And, again, we work with people all over, and it's very nice and very convenient to be able to meet, whether the person is a great distance away or they have or they only work remotely, that type of thing. And of course, it's easier to schedule across locations and time zones, and often easier to include larger, more diverse groups. But think about it, what are the cons? It can be harder to build rapport. It can be harder to build team chemistry, and the informal interactions like we're talking about can be limited. And the virtual meeting could be more prone to distractions, technology, and uneven participation. I don't know about you, but sometimes when you're really busy, there is that temptation to multitask. You might have a lot of other work to do, and nobody's in there in the office with you, so you may be able to get away with it. It is kind of funny sometimes you're in a meeting with someone and you're on an email from them. You're like, hey, you're supposed to be paying attention to this meeting. And then there's the technology. I think since 2020, the phrase "can you hear me okay" has become very popular. And I tell you what, it can be so frustrating when your technology is working fine for one meeting, you move on to the next, maybe you've switched platforms, and then you're people are like, "We can't hear you." So definitely technology can be a challenge, or even the levels of different participants. One person you can barely hear and the other person's too loud and you have to keep playing with your volume. So technology can be a challenge, and participation can definitely be uneven in the online meeting. People may talk over each other. If you're a reflective person, the virtual meeting can be a challenge when you're thinking and you're sharing what's most important and others are thinking out loud most of the time. Of course, you can always raise your hand. I I personally like the less informal type meeting where hand raising isn't needed, where it's a virtual meeting is just like if you were in person and you talk and you take turns and that kind of thing. But, sometimes in especially large meetings, the hand raise can be convenient, effective. Another issue I have with the virtual or hybrid meeting is the chat feature. I think it can be very handy for sharing links, or, maybe you do have a group sharing activity where you're doing an icebreaker and you say, hey, where's everybody from? Or, that kind of thing. And maybe it is a meeting where somebody is presenting something and you want to ask a question, but they're not taking questions yet. It could be nice to put in questions. But what I find really distracting is when people are sharing ideas, people are talking, and it's like there's two conversations going on. That can be very distracting. If you were an in-person meeting and there was a bunch of side conversations going on, you would have to shut that down because it's really hard. We can't focus on more than one thing at a time. So anyway, it's just you have to keep an eye on, effective use of the chat. And it just with the virtual meeting, it can be difficult with the discussion and some interaction. And of course, there's the hybrid meeting. And it's just, sometimes there is a group that's able to conveniently meet, but there's others that are not able to meet. Maybe they're great distance away or they only work remotely. So the hybrid meeting, it's a very convenient way to make sure everybody can meet. But just like we're talking about with the virtual meeting, there can be technical problems. And sometimes, it's really difficult when most of the people are in the room and just there's a couple people that are experiencing the technical issues. And, it can be a challenge to keep up with two audiences. And the remote participants can feel left out. And so as the facilitator, you just need to make sure that everybody's heard in the meeting, whether they're in the room or not. So which do you prefer? Again, they all have their place. Sometimes it's just not possible to meet in person, or maybe you are meeting in person, but there's some that just the only way they can join is remotely. So you gotta figure that out. What's best, what's most convenient, what's most cost effective. But then as an introvert, how do you show up effectively for meetings? And I always say a key to introvert success for meetings and other areas of life is preparation. We have talented minds and great imaginations, but often these gifts require some time and space. We're not always the best at thinking on our feet. In my book, Minding Your Time, Time Management, Productivity, and Success, especially for introverts, I discuss the importance of preparation for meetings and other things. As introverts, we think first and then speak with intention, and we do our best so we prepare ahead of time. Of course, we can't prepare for everything, and some things we are well prepared for without advanced preparation. So I definitely always want to mention that. For example, I have thought, read, and talked so much about introversion. I could easily speak to a group or be on a guest on a podcast with little preparation. But you ask me a question on something that I've never thought about before, I'm going to need to think about it. So, one strategy I found is a weekly review. It's a key part of preparing as an introvert because it gives you time to organize what needs to get done, look at upcoming meetings and activities, and think ahead instead of reacting on the spot. I remember reading about this concept in David Allen's great book, which I recommend, Getting Things Done. So with the weekly review, you look ahead at the coming week, or maybe you might even be looking a couple weeks ahead in advance. What meetings do I have? Do I need to prepare for them? Do I need to do some work in advance of them? Is there an agenda posted? If not, request one. So as I'm looking at these meetings, I make myself a note about the points I want to make in a particular meeting. I list the questions I want to be sure to ask. I also look at the meetings I have and different activities, and I may plug in additional needed time for focus and recharge. Do you know which meetings and activities are going to energize you and which will drain you? You may need to schedule some breaks or time to do some quiet, focused work. So sometimes, you can't just take breaks all the time, but maybe it's you're drained from a particular thing, but you can set aside some time to work quietly, and that might be recharging for you. But the key is figure out what drains you and how do you recharge best, and figure that out as part of your weekly review. Plug in some time here and there. Or maybe it's just a matter of making sure you have a little bit of time between meetings that, you don't go straight from one to another, that you block off some time to get some work done, to do some thinking. Again, introverts, we don't want to be alone all the time, but we need a balance of collaboration and thinking and working time. So this weekly review helps you focus on what matters most and show up as your best and make sure your week matches how you work best, how you protect your energy, and create that life that fits your needs for quiet reflection and some deep work. In other words, the weekly review, it's not just a productivity habit. It's a way to work in a more intentional and sustainable way. So, with preparation before the meeting, your ideas are already organized. I recommend speaking up early to show that you're present and have some valuable insights to share. I hear all kinds of advice. Some people say wait till the end. But the problem is, as an introvert, you are never going to be speaking as much as your extroverted colleagues. It's just we think and then speak and we share what's most important. Extroverts think out loud. It's just natural for both of us. There's not a good or bad, a right or wrong. It's just the way it is. And if you wait till the end, people might think you're not engaged, that you don't have anything to say. So I recommend as soon as you can, just make sure to speak up. And you might speak up again. You might speak several times, but establish yourself as someone that has ideas to share and that you are engaged. Because if you're not careful, you can get run over by the people that are thinking out loud most of the time. And again, no matter how confident you are, your strength is thinking. Just keep that in mind. So, I also hear a lot of talk about following up after the meeting as an introvert, which is sometimes just it's going to be necessary. But my recommendation is that you really want to share your ideas in the meeting. And that's why preparation is so important. Because sometimes, that's when the decision's being made. And after that, the ship has sailed. So do your best to prepare. Again, you can't prepare for everything. If you need time to think about something, ask for it. Establish a timeline. Maybe say, yeah, let me get back to you tomorrow or by Friday or some deadline so it's not just endless. So again, the idea is let's have this meeting, let's talk about what we need to talk about, but there's always going to be things that we come up with after. So in general, it needs to be okay if someone follows up in writing in an email, maybe to the group, or maybe one-on-one, or maybe have a one-on-one conversation after the meeting. That needs to be okay most of the time. And as an introvert, you have keen powers of observation. So use your listening and observation strengths to understand what others need. Often, this is an introvert superpower to uncover things that no one is noticing or to synthesize what is happening in the discussion. And focus on depth over volume. One strong point or thoughtful question can be more effective than whoever's talking the most. And build a reputation of being engaged and having thoughtful insights. I remember having a guest on my podcast that said the CEO would always turn to her in meetings and ask for her opinion because she had built the reputation that she was a deep thinker and she had a lot to say. So remember, introversion is not a weakness to fix, but a strength to understand and use well. Introverts are effective when they work with their energy, communicate their needs, and show up authentically and powerfully instead of faking extroverting. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you take the time to explore other episodes and learn from other amazing guests. If you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there is a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the four-letter Myers-Briggs code, and I will add a link in the show notes. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or through the quietandstrong.com website. And let's keep this conversation going. As always, get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.